There is a place on this planet where the water pressure could crush a school bus flat, like a soda can under a boot. Fewer humans have been there than have walked on the surface of the moon. And in the spring of 2026, a team of scientists lowered a camera into that darkness and filmed something they still cannot name. It was pale. It moved like nothing on any biology chart. And when researchers tried to place it on the tree of life, the same tree that holds every jellyfish, every insect, every whale, it did not fit anywhere. They gave it a placeholder label that basically translates to, "We do not know what this is. This is the story of the deepest point on Earth, and the proof that we still do not understand it." You have probably seen footage from space, rovers crawling across Mars, telescopes staring at galaxies 14 billion years old, astronauts floating past windows with the entire planet behind them. Here is the strange part. We have better maps of the surface of Mars and of the far side of the moon than we do of the ocean floor on our own planet. 70% of Earth is covered in water, and the deepest, darkest, most crushing part of that water, a trench in the western Pacific called the Mariana Trench, has been visited by fewer people than have stood on the moon. 24 astronauts have walked on lunar soil or orbited close enough to see it firsthand. As of today, only about 27 people have ever reached the very bottom of the Mariana Trench, a spot called the Challenger Deep. Think about the gap between those two numbers. We built rockets, trained pilots, and spent the equivalent of small national economies to send 24 people to a lifeless rock, and we succeeded, repeatedly, on television, in front of the entire world. Meanwhile, the deepest place on our own planet, sitting under water we sail across every day, has been seen by roughly the population of a single classroom. We spent the 20th century racing to the sky, and this entire time, there has been a canyon on our own seafloor deeper than Mount Everest is tall, sitting mostly unexplored, mostly unfilmed, mostly unknown. Tonight we are going down there, into the pressure, into the handful of people who tried it, into the strange biology that should not survive down there but does, and into the moment in 2026 when the ocean reminded everyone that it still has secrets we are not equipped to explain. Let's start with numbers, because the numbers do most of the talking here. Ocean scientists divide the sea into layers, almost like the atmosphere. Near the surface is the sunlight zone, where plants and coral can photosynthesize. Below that is the twilight zone, dim and cold. Below that, the midnight zone, in total darkness, starting around 1,000 meters down. Almost everything you have ever seen in a nature documentary, sharks, whales, coral reefs, giant squid, lives in the top few layers. The layer we are talking about tonight is far below all of that. It is called the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the ancient Greek god of the underworld, because the scientists who named it in the 1950s decided that was the closest word they had for a place that dark and that crushing. The deepest confirmed point of the Hadal Zone, the deepest confirmed point on the entire planet, sits inside the Challenger Deep, at approximately 10,935 meters below the surface. That measurement is not a rough guess. It comes from submersible dives conducted in 2020, using pressure sensors precise enough to correct for gravity, tides, and the exact weight of the water column above them. 10,935 meters does not mean much as a number until you compare it to something you already understand the size of. Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on the surface of the world, stands at 8,849 meters. If you pulled Everest out of the ground by its roots and lowered it into the Challenger Deep, its snow-covered peak, the same peak climbers have died trying to reach, would still sit more than 2,000 meters below the surface of the ocean. You would need to stack almost another quarter of Everest on top of it just to break daylight. Now think about what that much water actually does to a body. At sea level, the atmosphere pushes down on you with a force you have never once noticed, because every cell in your body evolved under that exact pressure. At the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the water above is pushing down with roughly 8 tons of force on every square inch. That is close to the weight of 50 jumbo jets, compressed onto an area the size of your palm. A human body at that depth, without protection, would not implode dramatically the way it does in movies. It would simply stop existing as a shape. Soft tissue collapses instantly. Air pockets in the lungs and sinuses would be crushed before a nerve signal could even register pain. Steel submarine hulls, built for military service, hulls engineered to survive depth charges in wartime, would crumple like a drink can at that pressure. This is not an abstract fact. It is the entire reason almost nobody has ever been there. It is not a place you can decide to explore with a wetsuit and some courage. Every single descent into the Challenger Deep has required a vehicle engineered specifically, obsessively, for one particular canyon on Earth and nothing else. Only a handful of vehicles, and even fewer human beings, have ever made it to the bottom. The first descent happened in 1960, in the middle of the Cold War, when both the United States and the Soviet Union were pouring money into anything that proved technological dominance, whether it pointed up into space or down into the ocean. A Swiss engineer named Jacques Piccard and a United States Navy lieutenant named Don Walsh climbed into a vessel called the Trieste, a bathyscaphe, essentially a steel sphere for the crew, welded to a massive float filled with gasoline. Gasoline was chosen because it is lighter than water, and, unlike air, it does not compress under pressure. Piccard came from a family obsessed with extremes. His father, Auguste Piccard, had already set records flying stratospheric balloons decades earlier, chasing altitude instead of depth. The son decided to chase the opposite direction entirely. The descent to the bottom took almost 5 hours. Partway down, at around 9,000 meters, with more than half the dive still ahead of them, the crew heard a loud crack echo through the cabin. One of the outer viewport windows had fractured under the pressure. In almost any other situation, that sound would end the mission immediately. Piccard and Walsh kept going anyway, trusting that the inner passenger sphere, the only barrier between them and instant death, was still intact. They reached the bottom, became the first human beings to see the deepest point on Earth with their own eyes, stayed there for about 20 minutes, and returned to the surface. Piccard later described the seafloor as a pale, almost lunar ooze. He also claimed he saw a flatfish resting on the bottom, gliding briefly across the silt. That single claim has been debated by marine biologists for more than 60 years, because a true bony fish surviving at that depth and pressure would contradict everything we understood, and still mostly understand, about vertebrate biology. Some scientists think he saw a sea cucumber and misread it in poor visibility. Nobody has ever fully settled the argument. After that dive, nobody returned to the Challenger Deep for 52 years. Not because interest disappeared, because almost nobody on Earth had the engineering, the funding, or the willingness to risk a second attempt on a vehicle that old. The second manned descent did not happen until March of 2012, when filmmaker James Cameron, the director behind Titanic and Avatar, piloted a submersible called the Deep Sea Challenger to the bottom, completely alone, folded into a vertical steel capsule barely wide enough to sit inside. Cameron had spent years personally funding and helping design the vessel, obsessed with deep ocean exploration, long before it connected to any of his films. His capsule used a new synthetic foam material, dense enough to survive the pressure, but light enough to float back to the surface on its own if anything failed. He spent about 3 hours on the seafloor, collecting sediment and biological samples, and filming footage that would later appear in a documentary. His dive proved something important. A single, dedicated pilot in a purpose-built vessel could reach the deepest place on the planet, alone, and come back alive. The most extensive exploration came later still. In 2019, a former naval officer turned investor named Victor Vescovo led an expedition called the Five Deeps, with a goal nobody had ever completed before: reaching the deepest point of all 5 of Earth's oceans in a single continuous project. His submersible, the limiting factor, launched from a support ship called the DSSV Pressure Drop. Vescovo did not just visit the Challenger Deep once. He dove there multiple times, mapped sections of the trench in far higher resolution than any previous expedition, and collected biological samples that scientists are still analyzing years later. On one of those dives, cameras also captured something quietly upsetting. Sitting on the sea floor, in the most remote, least accessible place on the entire planet, was a plastic bag and what appeared to be candy wrapper packaging. Human trash had reached the one place on Earth that had taken us until 1960 to reach with a person inside a submarine. That ship, the DSSV pressure drop, becomes important again later in this story because it is the very same vessel that, years afterward, would help find something nobody expected. Here is what should not make sense. Despite the crushing pressure, the total absence of sunlight, and near-freezing temperatures, the Challenger Deep is not empty. Life exists down there, and in places, it is surprisingly abundant. Sediment samples have revealed simple organisms called foraminifera, single-celled creatures that build tiny shells, thriving in numbers scientists did not expect to find at that depth. There are also xenophyophores, giant single-celled organisms that can grow larger than a human fist, an almost unbelievable size for something made of just one cell. Amphipods, small shrimp-like scavengers, swarm around any organic material that sinks from the surface, sometimes gathering in numbers thick enough to strip a piece of bait to nothing within minutes. Then there are the fish. In 2017, researchers using unmanned landers filmed a species now known as the Mariana snailfish at a depth of around 8,000 meters, one of the deepest confirmed fish sightings on record. The snailfish has no scales, a body closer to jelly than muscle, and skin so translucent you can partly see its internal organs through it. Its cells have adapted at a molecular level, altering the proteins inside them so they do not fold incorrectly under extreme pressure, a survival trick most vertebrate biology still cannot fully explain. Beyond fish, the Hadal Zone hosts entire ecosystems built around a process called chemosynthesis instead of sunlight. Near hydrothermal vents and cold seeps, bacteria convert chemicals, like hydrogen sulfide, directly into usable energy, forming the base of a food chain that has never once depended on the sun. Scientists studying astrobiology, the science of where else in the universe life might exist, pay close attention to exactly this kind of ecosystem. If life can build an entire food chain in total darkness, under crushing pressure, without sunlight, then the same thing might be possible under the ice of Europa or Enceladus, two moons in our solar system that scientists consider strong candidates for hosting life. This matters more than it sounds like it should. Every food chain diagram you were ever shown in school starts with sunlight and photosynthesis. The Hadal Zone runs on an entirely different rulebook. It is, in a very real sense, an alien biosphere sitting on our own planet, thriving in conditions closer to another moon than to the world most of us live our entire lives inside. And that is exactly why, when cameras went looking for more of it in 2022, what they found took years to fully process and did not become public until 2026. In 2022, that same ship, the DSSV pressure drop, launched a 2-month expedition, this time as a collaboration between the Mindaru UWA Deep Sea Research Center and the Tokyo University of Marine Science and Technology. Their target was not the Mariana Trench itself, but 3 of its neighboring trenches near Japan, the Japan Trench, the Ryukyu Trench, and the Izu Ogasawara Trench. All 3 plunged to depths approaching 10 kilometers, and all 3 had barely been surveyed before. Over months of dives, the team cataloged at least 108 distinct life forms, several of them record-breaking on their own. They filmed carnivorous sponges belonging to a family called Cladorhizidae at depths between 9,500 and 9,700 meters. The deepest confirmed sighting of a meat-eating sponge in scientific history. These sponges do not photosynthesize or filter feed like ordinary sponges. They trap tiny crustaceans on hooked, branch-like structures and slowly digest them over time, a hunting strategy evolved for a world with almost nothing to eat. They also pass through what researchers called crinoid meadows, more than 1,500 stalked crinoids, animals related to starfish, anchored to rock terraces, like an underwater forest that no sunlight has ever touched, swaying slightly in currents nobody on the surface will ever feel. But the discovery that made headlines in the spring of 2026 was different from everything else on that expedition. Near the seafloor of the Ryukyu Trench, at a depth of about 9,130 meters, cameras caught a pale, almost ghost-like creature gliding slowly across the bottom. It moved with a slow, deliberate motion, not darting like a fish, not drifting passively like a jellyfish, something in between that researchers struggled to describe using existing vocabulary. Researchers tried to classify it the way scientists classify everything, by comparing its body structure to known phyla, the broad biological categories that separate mollusks from arthropods from cnidarians, the category that includes jellyfish and coral. It did not match any of them convincingly. It was assigned a temporary scientific placeholder, Animalia incerta sedis, which translates roughly to animal of uncertain position within the kingdom of animals. Think about what that actually means. Every animal you have ever heard of, from a housefly to a humpback whale, from a starfish to a human being, fits somewhere on a classification system biologists have refined for more than 250 years. Since a Swedish botanist named Carl Linnaeus first organized life into the nested categories we still use today, this creature does not fit. Not because scientists have not tried hard enough, because, for now, it genuinely does not belong anywhere on that chart. So what could it actually be? Researchers have floated a few cautious possibilities, none confirmed. One idea is that it could be an unusually large, unusually pale species of holothurian, a sea cucumber relative adapted so extensively to extreme depth that its body no longer resembles its shallow water cousins. Another idea is that it belongs to a poorly understood group of gelatinous predators related to comb jellies, animals so fragile that most specimens disintegrate before they ever reach a laboratory intact. A third, more unsettling possibility is that it represents a genuinely new branch of the animal tree, something that split off from everything else so long ago and in such isolation that modern classification tools simply were not built with it in mind. It is entirely possible this organism will eventually be placed correctly, once more specimens are recovered and studied under a microscope instead of a camera lens. But right now, in the year 2026, there is a living animal on this planet that the entire framework of biology cannot currently explain. Not a fossil, not a myth. Something alive, right now, moving across the floor of a trench most of us will never see even a photograph of. So, what happens next? Researchers on the project have said the priority now is a return expedition, this time equipped to physically collect a specimen rather than only film one. That is much harder than it sounds. At 9,000 meters, a mechanical collection arm has to close gently enough not to destroy a fragile gelatinous body while operating under pressure that would flatten most industrial equipment. Even getting a sample back to the surface intact, without the temperature and pressure change tearing its cells apart, is its own engineering problem. There is reason for optimism, though. The cost of deep ocean sensors and autonomous landers has dropped significantly over the last decade, the same way camera and satellite technology became cheaper and more common in space exploration. Some marine biologists now believe the next 10 years could reveal more new hadal species than the previous 50 combined, simply because more institutions can finally afford to look. Here is the uncomfortable truth underneath all of this. We are not bad at ocean exploration because the ocean is unimportant. We are bad at it because it is extraordinarily difficult and extraordinarily expensive, and the reward, unlike space exploration, has never carried the same national pride or public spectacle. Estimates vary depending on the method used, but marine scientists broadly agree that more than 80% of the ocean remains unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored by direct human presence. We have sent people to the moon 6 separate times. We have driven rovers across the surface of Mars for years at a stretch, broadcasting the footage live to phones in every country on Earth. Meanwhile, most of the Hadal Zone, the deepest layer of our own planet's ocean, has been visited by fewer vehicles than you have fingers on one hand. Part of the problem is cost. A single submersible, capable of surviving Challenger, deep pressure can cost tens of millions of dollars to build and maintain, and every dive requires a dedicated support ship, a trained crew, weeks of preparation, and enormous risk, all for a few hours on the bottom. Space agencies, by comparison, have decades of accumulated government funding, international prestige, and public enthusiasm behind them. Part of the problem is risk itself. Unlike space, where a mistake often means a slow, survivable failure with time to react, a hull breach at the bottom of the Mariana Trench offers no warning and no second chance. The pressure does not injure a person. It erases them, instantly, without drama, without the kind of slow, unfolding disaster that makes for a rescue story. And part of the problem, honestly, is attention. Space captures human imagination in a way the deep ocean rarely does, because anyone can look up and see stars with their own eyes at night, while the trench sits invisible beneath thousands of meters of black water that almost none of us will ever look at directly or even think about on any given day. But that gap in our knowledge is exactly why a placeholder name like Animalia incerta Cetes matters so much. It is proof, sitting right there in a scientific database, that discovery does not require leaving the planet at all. Sometimes the unexplored frontier is not somewhere out past the orbit of Mars. Sometimes it is directly beneath a fishing boat, 11 kilometers down, waiting for someone to finally point a camera at it. We like to think of the unknown as something distant, something out past the edge of the solar system, past the light our best telescopes can barely reach after traveling for millions of years to get here. But the truth is stranger and closer than that. The unknown is also here, 10,935 meters beneath a boat that could sail directly over it without a single person on board ever realizing what lies below their feet. Somewhere down there right now, in permanent darkness and crushing pressure that would erase a human body in an instant, an organism that does not fit anywhere on our classification system is gliding slowly across the seafloor, doing whatever it does, completely unaware that it briefly became the reason millions of people looked up from their phones and asked what else might be down there that we simply have not found yet. We spent a century pointing our cameras at the sky. Maybe it is time we spent a little more of it pointing them down. If this pulled you into the dark with it, you know what to do. Subscribe, and next time we go somewhere even fewer people have ever seen.